Okay, so genetically modified foods, we sometimes abbreviated GM, or you hear genetically modified organisms, GMOs. It's the same thing. It's also sometimes called genetic engineering, GE. So those terms are all interchangeable. GM is the same as GMO, is the same as GE. Now, to start the discussion, and your book does a nice job of talking about the political and controversial side and who's pro and who's against. And that's not the point of this lecture. The point of this lecture is to kind of give you the basics about where we are in the United States. And then it's up to you as a consumer to make up your mind with regards to how you feel about purchasing foods that have genetically modified ingredients in them or don't. We have known for generations that farmers have always selectively bred certain strains, certain crops to get the most desirable traits. If you compare today's corn, for example, to ancient corn, there were some incidences with only 5 kernels of corn on a whole ear. Okay, and it's been selectively bred throughout the generations, and now that it's commonplace to have an ear of corn with lots of kernels on it. You can even see the pictures of the very colorful carrots. Okay, over time, some of these strains have been bred to give this really nice, vibrant purple color, which you can basically sell for more money. They're nutritionally identical to orange carrots, okay, but they're a value-added food because they've been selectively bred for that desirable trait, which in the case is purple or red carrot. Selective breeding is very different from utilizing recombinant DNA technology, which is what we're going to talk about today. Okay. This use of rDNA is wherein food technologists take desirable traits from one organism and then directly transfer them into the genetic makeup of the recipient organism. So it's not waiting generations and decades and understanding chromosomes and then planting in 4 different plots and figuring out which one has the most desirable trait and then proliferating that one. This is instantaneously, I'm picking the one gene I like from this organism A and I'm putting it into organism B. Why would you want to do that? And there's 2 reasons. Can either promote useful traits, for example, disease or cold resistance. Can identify genes in certain animals, even fish, okay, salmon that are extremely resistant to cold. If you could take out a gene and put it in a strawberry so you could grow them in the dead of winter in Minnesota. That's an exaggeration. That technology doesn't actually exist. But the potential is there to push for useful traits. Cold resistance and disease resistance are 2 big ones. Or additional nutrients. And we'll talk about that today too. You can also, on the other hand, though, suppress unwanted traits. Another technology that doesn't exist but is feasible is down the road with genetic engineering, perhaps we could create peanuts whereby we turned off the gene that caused peanut allergy so that kids with peanut allergies could actually eat peanuts and not go into anaphylactic shock. This is a graphic that's from the FDA that tries to explain, I think probably in more detail than it needs, be the traditional selective breeding methods versus genetic engineering. And this is kind of a political argument in the sense that you hear proponents of genetic engineering, so those who like it, we'll talk about why they like it, they're saying, well, this is just evolved. People have always selectively bred. This is just another way of selective breeding. So the FDA on their website from Consumer Updates has tried to show that it's not actually the same. Selective breeding, okay, you would take a donor strand of DNA, that's the orange one on the left, okay, and there is a desired gene in there, the red ones, okay, and you would have a recipient strand on the other, a different organism, and you would combine it together where many genes from the first one get into the last one, including that one desirable trait you want. Okay, and this is what we've done over generations. It takes a very long time with selective breeding. With genetic engineering, what you enable to do is you can take that desired gene only, add it to your recipient strand, and your resultant strand now looks and acts just like the original recipient did, except you've imported just that one desirable trait that you want. It's extremely rapid. And you might be surprised, we'll look in a second at how quickly all this stuff has evolved. It's been 20 years. There was nothing genetically modified in our food supply, and now almost everything is. You'll see that more than 75% of packaged and processed foods in the U.S. have genetically modified ingredients. So it's a very, very rapid transformation of our food supply. And in the U.S., you could argue it's happened right under our noses. Okay, Tom, survey shows that Americans, when they're asked how they feel about genetically modified foods, they say, "Oh, I hate them. That's such a bad idea. That's frankenfoods. It's so dangerous. You shouldn't be manipulating the DNA." And then you say, "Do you eat 100% organic?" Well, no. Then you most certainly have eaten something genetically modified today. We don't have labeling laws in this country. We'll talk a little bit about that towards the end today. So genetic engineering at its core has had foreign genes from other plants or animals inserted into another plant's genetic code. And it allows scientists to speed up the process, okay, speed is key here, of moving desired genes from one plant into another. Now, why would you want to do that? Okay, there's two sides to every story, and so we'll start with the proponents of genetic engineering. Number one, this is about cost and this is about money at its very core. Food is big business. And in the United States, there's big food companies making lots of money because crop yields go up when you use genetically modified ingredients or seeds. You can get a lot more food grown on the same plot of land with a lot less input. You're going to be making more money. Pesticide reliance. If you can genetically engineer a corn that has its own pesticide built in, you don't have to spray your whole field with pesticides. Now, the farming company doesn't have to pay for the pesticides, which they like, but also looks good from a PR standpoint. Hey, we're not putting pesticides all over your food anymore. So it's a clean or green technology is sometimes the spin you hear. There's the potential to reduce hunger and poverty. Okay? That has a lot to do with crop yield. Lots of controversy in countries like India and Pakistan, where you see farmers who are very readily accepting these products, sometimes without really understanding what they are. Okay? Hey, this is a seed that's going to make you be able to grow more and sell more and make more money. Okay? But then all of a sudden, you see that they kind of overtake the food supply, and we lose crop variety and biodiversity, which we'll talk about next as a detriment. Nutrient content is in there. There exists the potential to enhance the nutrient content of certain foods. And a good example of this is a product called golden rice. Okay, the technology for golden rice has been around for a long time, and it's very promising. Think about a country like, let's say, like Nepal. Okay, Nepalese people, as do many Central and South Asians, eat a lot of rice. Rice is high in starch, it's low in protein, low in other vitamins and minerals, but it's cheap and it fills you up. But there's a lot of vitamin A deficiency in Nepal. It's the number one cause of preventable blindness around the world. So wouldn't it make sense if we could genetically engineer rice by putting vitamin A into it? Something people are already eating, which is rice. It's a nutrient which they need more of, vitamin A, and we can actually stop preventable blindness. The golden rice, the potential's there. We can do that. The reality is, in the last 20 years, though, since genetically modified foods have been on the market, this is not what big agribusiness companies are doing. They're interested primarily in the bottom line. They're making lots and lots of money by producing greater yields of food, okay, selling greater quantities, and you as the typical consumer think, well, my food's getting even cheaper. Your food costs are rising a little bit, but still, if we look at a global scale, Americans pay, compared to all other developed countries, significantly less of their disposable income towards food. Our food supply is really cheap. We like technology because it makes our food cheap. Okay, proponents say, oh, but it could help save poverty and hunger. It could, but nobody's using it for that application. You don't make any money selling vitamin A enhanced rice to poor people in India. Okay, what are the potentially harmful effects? None of this has been established. These things have only been around for 20 years. So proponents of GE say, there's no data to show that any of this is dangerous. Let's go with it. And to be honest, the U.S. government has kind of said, these things look safe, so they can be in your food supply, America. But other people, especially scientists and other people who are a little bit more suspicious, say, wait a minute, they've only been around for 20 years. Interestingly, if you look at the amount of food allergies and the rise in food allergy rates, it correlates very nicely with the introduction of GM ingredients. Now, no one's ever established a link, but there's maybe some sort of link there. Who knows? Okay, it hasn't been established. There's lots of theories about what could potentially be wrong with GM. But what if 50 years down the road we start to see genetic mutations as a result of these foods? We've only been in our food supply for 20 years at this point. So the question is if GMO food's been banned in Europe. And certainly. The next slide, at the bottom there. The European Union and Japanese people laugh at Americans, okay? Because in the EU and Japan, if like less than 1% of the ingredients are genetically modified, you have to have a big old label on it. They are so much less receptive of GM foods. And they think it's funny that Americans say they don't like GM foods, and yet 75% of all our packaged and processed foods have GM ingredients. And Americans, they have no idea what's in their food. Beyond the cost of what food is, most Americans don't care about food. Okay? 85% of all corn in the U.S. is now GE. Well, who cares? I don't eat corn. Yes, you do. It's high fructose corn syrup in everything you eat, and it's the feed that feeds all the animals that you eat a ton of too. 91% of all soybean in the U.S. is GE. Don't like soybeans. Yes, you do. It's soybean oil. It's in all the packaged and processed and fried foods you eat. 88% of all the cotton in the U.S. is GE. I don't eat cotton. Yes, you do. It's cottonseed oil, widespread in packaged and processed foods. There's no labeling requirement in the U.S. The only way to know that you're not eating GM ingredients is to eat organic. Because in the U.S., we don't have to disclose if a food contains a GM ingredient. In the U.S., there are currently 9 GE crops that are allowed to be marketed. Okay, that's corn, soybeans, canola, cotton, sugar beets. And it might seem only 9, but look what those ingredients make. Sugar, corn, the different oils, that's in everything that we eat. Plus alfalfa, Hawaiian papaya, zucchini, and yellow crookneck squash. What's remarkable is how quickly we've gotten here. If you look at the data from 1996, okay, so just 20 years ago, there was no GE soybean, cotton, or corn. Corn is mostly feed corn in the U.S. at this point. And then fast forward to where we are now, certainly more than 60%, but it's getting more like 80 and 90% of all of these crops are now genetically modified. It's perfectly legal in the U.S., and your typical person has no idea that it's in there. It is regulated by the U.S. government. The FDA, the USDA, and the EPA have very, very ambiguous language about they haven't seen any reason why it's unsafe, so it must be safe. Okay? The FDA regulates the safety and the labeling of GM foods. The USDA regulates the research and the development of new agricultural products. And then the EPA regulates pesticides that may be present in foods and sets pesticide tolerance levels, which you can use on genetically engineered ingredients as well. If you're interested in learning more about it, it's kind of interesting sometimes to look at the government websites. How can this possibly be that all these things that we know nothing about are in our food? You can kind of read some of the ambiguous language from the U.S. government in those first 3 websites. But the last one is really interesting, especially in context of where we are in California. Okay, it was a big push in late 2013 in the election cycle to label or genetically modified foods. Because the people who say they're safe. The people who think they're unsafe say, well, if they're so safe, how come we just can't even know if they're in our foods? And they have this organization called Just Label It. Just tell us which foods it's in, and then we'll make the decision as the consumer as to whether or not we want to buy it. Because again, most Americans don't realize it's in everything they eat if they're not eating organic. So the Just Label It's very one-sided website, very, very anti-GM, but it's a nice juxtaposition to what the government is saying, which is, oh, these things are safe for you. You're saying, well, maybe they're not. But don't we as consumers have a right to know and just have it on our labels? Currently the situation is no, but there's a push. And you're seeing it at different state levels. Some of the more progressive states really kind of building up an interest in labeling it. There hasn't been a critical mass yet. A huge defeat for California in late 2013, paid for solely by these huge agribusiness companies who make all their money off of selling GM products. So it's an interesting controversy, and I think your book does a very nice job of talking about kind of the intricacies of what is sometimes a pretty complicated topic as well. So any questions?